Most people, they're told that evolution is scientific fact pretty much all their lives, and that the Bible's account of origins, that's just Bible stories. In fact, I've had a number of parents tell me that their students will be going into class and that the science teacher in particular might say, now, if you happen to go to church and if you believe Bible stories, and if those Bible stories give you hope and purpose and meaning in your life, you can believe those Bible stories. But while we're talking about science, here we're dealing with facts.
Right. And so on the one hand, we've got our scientific facts, and you Christians have your fairy tales, as people on the internet are often fond of saying. So the question there is, there's a decision, and how does that get navigated?
Right. Yeah, those students do have a decision to be made. But it's not just the students. I mean, think about family members and friends. I mean, for instance, do you have any family members or friends that think you're just a little nuts for believing the Bible's account of origins because science has proven evolution to be a scientific fact?
Well, yeah, definitely. And I can think of people off the top of my head who have struggled for decades to try to fit an evolutionary model into a biblical worldview, and it just doesn't work. They're fundamentally incompatible with each other. These don't work together. What is a Christian to do?
Well, let me tell you a story. I have a friend, Sammy, who lives back in my home state of California. He loves to surf. He fits the stereotype of the Californian. But he also is a professional California beach lifeguard. Many years ago, he was assigned specifically to Pismo Beach. However, on his day off, he took his quad out and he was riding up and down the sand dunes all day long, enjoying his time off. However, as the day came to a close and the sun was hitting the Pacific Ocean, there was also a storm brewing. So as he was riding down the beach in order to get back to camp to rest up for his next day's work, he encountered about 12 people that were yelling, waving their arms to get his attention. So he went over there, and when he turned off his engine, he found out why they were so excited. Because you see, there was a surfboard there on the beach, but the surfer was 100 yards off. And in this case, that storm was developing waves with 8-foot faces, picking up his body and throwing him into the rocks below. And he was severely lacerated from head to toe. However, Sammy did decide to take off his helmet and his boots and those things that would weigh him down. And he was able to make it out to that man and brought him back to shore. And with medical help, his life was spared. Sheridan, let me ask you a question. Why did he do it while those 12 people maybe just stood there and watched?
Well, because he was a trained lifeguard.
Right. You see, he was trained to know how to navigate those waves. And I think those waves are a little like our culture. Questions pounding on people like, is there a God? Does he love me? And how about this one? Is the Bible true? And am I right that in our culture, that question has been answered with a resounding no? And if that's the case, I believe it's like a tsunami that are pulling Christians in particular away from that solid rock, that inerrant word of God that tells us about origins. So the real challenge I think that we should do, and that is, are we willing to equip and train ourselves with the answers to the tough questions that people are asking in our culture so that we can be the one that dives in and rescues the perishing?
1 Peter 3:15 talks about being prepared to give a defense for the hope that lies within us, right?
Exactly. And by the way, that defense, it says that always be prepared to give a defense to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. And that word defense comes from a Greek word, which is apologia. And that was a legal term. It was used in the courts of law. It would describe what an attorney would do to give a reasoned, rational, and logical defense for his client, or perhaps prosecute the accused. Now, does this sound like a suggestion or a command to you?
Well, it's clearly a command.
It's a command, and every believer needs to be equipped with a defense for their faith in this very area. We need to be ready. And kids hear about evolution 24/7, it seems. It's saturated in our culture. And if that's the case, where are they going to hear a biblical answer? Is it going to be when they go to school?
No.
How about TV? Certainly university, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah. So we need to be equipped with a defense for our faith for the sake of our children and our grandchildren. That's where we can get the biblical answer.
So where can we go to get a biblical defense?
Well, we're going to start out right there in the book of Genesis. In fact, there are some scientific statements in the very first chapter of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1.
Okay.
There's a phrase that's repeated 10 times. It says that God created plants and animals to reproduce after their kind. Now, that basically means that dogs give birth to dogs and pigs give birth to pigs and corn kernels bring us corn plants. But when you think about it, really we're referring to the genetic material that's in those original kinds. And that DNA is passed on to future generations. And although those creatures have the ability to adapt to their environment, for which we should be very thankful, the Bible is very clear that God created plants and animals to reproduce after their kind. However, most people hear a very different story than that. Mm-hmm. Most people hear that over millions and millions and millions of years, as a creature passes on its genetic information to future generations through the process of natural selection and random mutations, that one kind of creature can change into a completely different kind of creature over millions of years. So do you see the difference in those two accounts?
Well, definitely. So obviously kids are getting bombarded with this from every angle, like we just were saying. What happens when parents can't answer the questions that their kids have?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if you've heard of the Barna Institute. This is an organization that does surveys regarding matters of faith. And they actually found that 2/3 of children raised in Christian homes by the time they get to be the age 18 are leaving the faith. That is something we should be concerned with, and we need to have that defense for our faith. We need to have answers to those questions.
Where can people go if they want to learn more about this subject?
Good question. If there was any one particular resource that I would refer people to, it would be the Creation Answers book. Now, this answers the 60 most asked questions in the creation and evolution issue. Things like plate tectonics, carbon dating, how did all the animals fit on the ark? What about the dinosaurs? And why does a loving God allow death and suffering? And many, many more. It's easy to understand. It's a very quick read. And I believe that if Christians read this book, they'll be able to answer at least 95% of all the questions people challenge the Bible with when it comes to the creation evolution issue.
And if you look in the description of this video, we do have a link to the ebook of the Creation Answers book, which you can download for free. Scott, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.